Three young identical triplet boys vanished without a trace from a small Texas town in 1981, disappearing while playing outside their family home. But 30 years later, their mother spots a crucial detail hidden in one of their old photographs, a shocking discovery that would expose what really happened to them. The afternoon sun beat down on the modest suburban neighborhood in the rural outskirts of Texas near the Mexican border. Evie Marlowe adjusted her sun hat as she stood in the backyard of the Rodriguez family home, watching children play and adults mingle at young Tommy Rodriguez's birthday party. At 60 years old, Evie still carried herself with grace, though the decades had etched fine lines around her eyes that had spent countless hours scanning faces and crowds, always searching. Her husband Walter, 2 years her senior, stood chatting with some of the men by the grill. They had arrived an hour ago, joining the celebration as the neighborhood had done for generations. The birthday song had been sung, candles blown out, and cake distributed. Children now played freely while adults engaged in casual conversation. Evie was half listening to her neighbor Martha's story about her garden when movement at the patio door caught her attention. A man she didn't recognize stepped into the backyard, holding the hand of a young boy around 8 years old. "Sorry we're late," the man announced to no one in particular. "Something happened at home." The boy immediately broke free from his father's grip and darted toward the other children playing in the yard. As he ran past, Evie froze. The child wore green checkered overalls with bright yellow straps over a long-sleeved shirt. His dark curly hair bounced as he moved. Something about the combination struck Evie like a physical blow. Without excusing herself from the conversation, she moved quickly across the yard, her heart hammering in her chest. She reached out and grasped the boy's shoulder, turning him around to face her. "Where did you get those clothes?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hand moved instinctively to touch his curly hair. The boy's eyes widened in alarm. He twisted away from her grasp and ran toward his father. "Daddy! Daddy!" he cried out, his voice high with fear. The man looked up, concerned, and immediately started walking toward Evie, who stood rooted to the spot, trembling slightly. "Is everything okay?" the man asked, placing a protective hand on his son's shoulder. His tone was more curious than accusatory, but his body language was clear. He was worried about what had just happened. "She touched me," the boy said, pressing against his father's side. "She scared me." The man's expression hardened slightly. "What's going on? Why did you grab my son?" Evie's mouth opened, but no words came out. She reached toward the boy's clothing again, her fingers stopping short of actually touching him. "Those clothes, where did you get them?" "Excuse me?" The man stepped between Evie and his son. "What's your problem, lady?" Walter appeared at Evie's side then, along with several neighbors who had noticed the commotion. He wrapped a protective arm around his wife's shoulders, taking in the scene with a quick glance. "I'm sorry," Walter said, his voice steady despite the slight tremor in his hand. "My wife didn't mean any harm." He looked at the boy, and Evie felt him stiffen beside her. "Your son's outfit, it's very similar to what our boys wore. Our sons, they were triplets. They went missing 30 years ago. They had green checkered overalls just like that, with yellow straps and long sleeves. It must have shocked my wife." The neighbors murmured in understanding. Mrs. Rodriguez, the party host, stepped forward. "It's true," she said softly to the man. "The Marlowe boys disappeared back in 1981. Terrible tragedy. The whole neighborhood searched for weeks." The man's expression softened immediately. "I'm so sorry, I had no idea." He looked down at his son's clothing. "I bought these months ago at a department store. I can't remember exactly when." Evie, still stunned, pleaded, "Please, could I just look at the clothes?" "I just want to see if it's the same brand." Walter gently held her back. "Evie, honey, the boy is not Lucas, Noah, or Gabriel. Let's not upset him further." He turned to the man. "I apologize for my wife. This has been difficult." Mrs. Rodriguez touched Evie's arm. "Evie, dear, you look so pale. Maybe you should go home and rest?" Walter nodded gratefully. "Yes, I think that's best." He thanked the party host, excused them from the gathering, and nodded respectfully to the father and son. "I wish we had met under better circumstances." "I'm truly sorry for upsetting your wife," the man said sincerely. "I honestly had no idea. We're new to the neighborhood and thought attending the birthday party would be a nice way to meet everyone." "It's not your fault," Walter assured him. Walter guided Evie out of the backyard, supporting her as they walked the 3 blocks to their home. Once inside, he helped her to the sofa and went to the kitchen to make tea. When he returned, he helped her take a sip from the steaming cup. Evie's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean to scare that little boy," she said, her voice breaking. When I saw those clothes." Walter nodded, sitting beside her. "I know. You had an anxiety attack. It's okay." "I can't forget them, Walter," Evie said, tears streaming down her face now. "Even after 30 years. Walter took her hand in his. They would be adults now, all 3 of them, grown men. "I know," Evie whispered. "I feel so embarrassed, always bringing up the past, making everyone uncomfortable." "We don't have to forget our sons," Walter said firmly. "I was shocked, too, when I saw that boy's clothes. They were so similar. Green checkered overalls, yellow straps, long sleeves." Evie sat up straighter. "I want to see their photos again, Walter. The ones where they're wearing those clothes." Walter hesitated. "They're in the box in the attic. We haven't opened it in over 20 years. "Please," Evie said, "if it will help me calm down." Walter sighed, but nodded. "I'll get it for you." He disappeared upstairs, and Evie heard his footsteps overhead, then the creak of the attic ladder. Several minutes later, he returned carrying a dusty cardboard box. He set it on the coffee table and wiped the dust off with a nearby hand towel. Together, they opened the lid, revealing the carefully preserved belongings of their missing triplets. Evie and Walter carefully removed items from the box, handling each one as if it were made of glass. Small toys, baseball gloves, 3 identical stuffed bears, homework assignments with gold stars and smiley faces, each object a preserved moment from their son's truncated childhood. "The photo album should be at the bottom," Walter said, his voice husky with emotion. "We packed it last." As they removed the final layer of memorabilia, the leather-bound album appeared. Walter lifted it gently and placed it on his lap. The cover was smooth from years of handling, though it hadn't been touched in decades. They settled side by side on the sofa as Walter opened the album. The first pages showed 3 identical newborns in the hospital, then 3 toddlers taking their first steps, birthday parties where candles were blown out in perfect synchronicity. "They were always so in tune with each other," Evie whispered, tracing a finger over a photo of the boys building a sandcastle at the beach. Walter turned the pages slowly, and they paused at each image, recalling the stories behind them. Then they reached the photo they were looking for, the triplets standing in front of their house, wearing their green checkered overalls with yellow straps over long-sleeved shirts. They were smiling broadly, arms around each other's shoulders. "This was taken the morning they disappeared, exactly an hour before they're gone," Walter said softly. Evie nodded and leaned closer, studying the overalls. "Look, Walter, the boy at the party, his clothes were similar, but different. The shade of green is different. Ours look more vintage, while his was more modern, and the checkered lines are thinner in our photo." "The straps are different, too," Walter noted. "Similar concept, but definitely not the same garments." Evie rubbed her eyes and sighed. "I feel terrible about how I reacted to that poor boy and his father. What were their names again?" Walter replied, "The boy is Malvin, and his father is Rowan. They're pretty new to the neighborhood, moved in about 3 months ago, I think." "I should apologize to them later," Evie said, shaking her head. "I must have terrified that child." They continued looking at the photo, reminiscing about that final day. Walter smiled as Evie recounted how Gabriel had insisted on wearing his overalls backward until she convinced him otherwise, and how Noah had already managed to get a grass stain on his knee before breakfast. As Walter poured himself another cup of tea, Evie suddenly poked his arm, almost causing him to spill. "Walter, look at the background," she said urgently. "Isn't that the Cadillac Lucas was such a big fan of?" Walter set down the teapot and peered at the photo. In the background, partially visible at the edge of the frame, was the front section of a reddish-brown Cadillac parked across the street. "You're right," he said slowly, memories surfacing. "Lucas was obsessed with cars, especially that one. The boys used to beg to look inside whenever they saw it." "That's Mr. Howard Fielding's Cadillac," Evie said, her voice growing more intense. "Their school teacher. Remember how he rarely drove it? He told us it was his most cherished possession." "Everyone in the school community knew about that car," Walter agreed. "The kids thought it was the most amazing thing they'd ever seen." "We were such a tight community back then," Evie murmured. "Everyone knew each other, and Mr. Howard was such a kind man. The children adored him." She turned the photo over, checking for any notes, then back again, examining it more closely. "Walter, are you absolutely sure this image was taken on the day they disappeared?" "Yes, why?" "Because Mr. Howard had moved to a different town by then," Evie said, her brow furrowing. "Remember how sad all the parents were when he switched schools? The kids loved him so much, we threw him a farewell party at the school the day before he left." Walter frowned. "I'm certain this was taken the morning of their disappearance. They disappeared in the afternoon." "But that's strange," Evie insisted. "Mr. Howard had supposedly moved from town a week before the boys disappeared. So how could his Cadillac be parked there in the photo?" Walter set the album aside and rummaged through the box again, searching through the items they had already removed. Finally, he found what he was looking for, the original Kodak photo envelope, with the film negatives still inside. The processing date was stamped clearly on the outside. "Look," he said, showing Evie the date. "This confirms it. The film was developed 2 days after they disappeared. These were definitely taken that morning." Evie rubbed her arms, suddenly chilled despite the warm air in the room. If that was really Mr. Howard's car, then he might have seen something suspicious in the neighborhood that day. The police would have questioned him. She paused, thinking. But they never mentioned interviewing the teacher, which means he must have truly been gone before the boys disappeared. Walter noticed Evie's increasing agitation and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Evie, it could be a coincidence. It might not even be Mr. Howard's Cadillac. It could have belonged to anyone." "But I don't remember anyone else in the neighborhood who had a Cadillac," Evie countered. "We were very close with everyone. We would have known." "Maybe it didn't belong to a local," Walter suggested reasonably. "It could have been a visitor to one of the neighbors. You shouldn't overthink this, honey. The police examined all our family photos, including this one. They questioned everyone and followed all leads. If it had been Mr. Howard's Cadillac, they would have noticed the license plate and confirmed it to us." Evie took a deep breath as Walter urged, accepting another sip of tea from the cup he offered. The warmth seemed to calm her slightly. "You're right," she said finally. "It's probably nothing." Walter nodded in relief and closed the photo album. Evie had removed the photo, wanting to keep it close. Together, they began gently returning the items to the box, each memento a fragment of the lives their sons had lived and the futures they were meant to have. After packing everything back into the box, Walter glanced at the ornate clock on the mantel and jumped to his feet. "Good Lord, I completely lost track of time. I have my checkup appointment today at 11:50 a.m., and it's already 11:30. It's Saturday, and the clinic only opens until 1 p.m. Evie looked up from the photo album, surprised. "I totally forgot to remind you. Dr. Matthews doesn't like it when patients are late." She quickly helped Walter gather what he needed: his health insurance card, the list of medications he was taking, and the journal where he'd been recording his blood pressure readings. Within 5 minutes, Walter was ready to leave. "Are you sure you'll be okay by yourself?" he asked, pausing at the door. "I'll be fine," Evie assured him. "I'll make some lunch, maybe take a nap this afternoon, and I'll have dinner ready when you get back. Don't worry about me." Walter nodded, kissed her cheek, and hurried out to the car. After he left, Evie went to their bedroom and picked up her phone from the nightstand. There was a text message from Louise Mitchell, an old friend who had worked at the school board for nearly 3 decades before retiring. "Annual school district retiree reunion coming up next month. Hope to see you and Walter there. We miss you both." Evie sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the message. Louise would have known Howard Fielding professionally. She might have information about him, though Evie didn't want to suspect Mr. Howard. He had been such a kind and wonderful teacher, especially good with children. She couldn't shake the strange feeling and questions that had settled over her since spotting the Cadillac in the photograph. Impulsively, she tapped Louise's contact information and called her. "Evie!" "What a wonderful surprise," Louise answered warmly. "Did you get my text about the reunion?" "I did, yes. Walter and I will try to make it," Evie said. "How have you been, Louise?" "It's been too long." They spent several minutes catching up, exchanging news about mutual friends and sharing updates about their health and families. Finally, Evie steered the conversation toward her real reason for calling. "Louise, do you remember Mr. Howard Fielding? He taught at Oak Ridge Elementary back in the early 80s. "Howard? Of course, I remember him. Such a talented teacher. The children and parents adored him." "Do you know where he is now?" Evie asked, trying to sound casual. "I remember he moved out of town, but I can't recall exactly where he went." There was a pause on the line. "Actually, Evie, I think you've got it wrong. Howard never continued teaching, at least not in the public school system. He never filed any transfer papers to another district or state." Evie sat up straighter. "He didn't? But we had a farewell party for him. He told everyone he was moving to teach at another school." "No, that's not how it happened. Maybe he was just joking when he said that. You know how he was," Louise said. "From what I've heard, he moved to a remote area in Texas and started a private charity farm for immigrant children." "A farm?" Evie repeated, confused. "I always thought he moved to a different state to teach." "No, nothing like that," Louise assured her. "Wait, someone mentioned the name of his place to me a few months ago. Let me think." There was silence for a moment. "Ah, I remember now. It's called Howard's Haven for Hope." "Howard's Haven for Hope," Evie repeated, committing the name to memory. "Why are you suddenly asking about Howard?" Louise inquired. Evie hesitated. "I just remembered he had a Cadillac, and I saw a similar Cadillac in an old family picture." "Oh, yes, he did have that beautiful Cadillac," Louise confirmed, "but he rarely took it out for a drive. He preferred to use his other car for daily travel. That Cadillac was his pride and joy, more of a showpiece than transportation." "Do you remember exactly when Howard left town?" Evie asked, her heart beating faster. Louise sighed. "It was so long ago, Evie, I really couldn't say for certain." After ending the call, Evie immediately went to the computer in the small home office and searched for Howard's Haven for Hope. She found a simple website with minimal information. The homepage banner showed smiling young men and boys working on a farm. Most appeared to be of Spanish or Mexican heritage, with dark hair and tanned skin. She browsed through the gallery photos, but nothing looked unusual or suspicious. In fact, the images portrayed what seemed to be a positive, nurturing environment. Howard appeared to be doing good work, providing opportunities for immigrant children. His profile page featured a brief biography mentioning his background as an elementary teacher and his passion for working with children. The farm's mission statement emphasized education, support, and creating pathways to success for immigrant youth. Evie found the farm's address and an email contact, but no phone number. She stared at the screen, contemplating her next move. It might be good to meet with Mr. Howard again to see what he was doing now. Perhaps she could show him the picture and ask if the Cadillac was his. Checking the clock, 11:45 a.m., Evie realized she could still make it to the address today. It was only a 90-minute drive. If she left soon, she could reach the farm by early afternoon, with plenty of daylight remaining. She picked up her phone and called Walter at the clinic. "Walter, how's your appointment going?" "I'm still in the waiting room," he replied. "Everything okay?" "Yes, but I found some interesting information." Evie explained what Louise had told her about Howard's farm. "I'd like to go there today, Walter. Would you come with me?" There was a pause. "I don't know, Evie. I'm a bit worried about you. You seem fixated on this Cadillac coincidence." "I'm fine," she assured him. "I don't want to overthink this or have bad feelings toward Mr. Howard. He was always so kind. The charity farm looks interesting, and it would be nice to catch up with him after all these years." "All right," Walter agreed, "but we should call him first. Let him know we're coming." "I didn't find a phone number, just an email address. I'll send a message, though they might not see it before we arrive." They agreed to meet at the clinic since it was on the way to the farm. Walter would finish his appointment, and Evie would take the bus to meet him there. "I'll leave right away," Evie said, already reaching for her purse. "See you soon." Evie left the house with a sense of purpose, locking the door behind her and walking briskly to the bus stop 3 blocks away. The Texas heat was building as the day progressed, and she was grateful when the bus arrived just as she reached the stop. The 15-minute ride to the medical clinic passed quickly as Evie's mind churned with questions about Howard Fielding and his Cadillac. As she stepped off the bus, a young woman in a straw hat and bright yellow T-shirt thrust a colorful flyer into her hand. "County Agricultural Fair this week," the woman announced cheerfully before moving on to the next disembarking passenger. Evie glanced at the flyer as she walked toward the clinic. It advertised a week-long agricultural event that had started yesterday. Each day featured different activities, culminating in a farmer's market and various competitions over the weekend. She noticed the large print announcing a special auction today at a site not far from Howard's farm. "Interesting," she murmured, tucking the flyer into her purse as she approached the clinic entrance. Inside, she found Walter at the cashier's desk, settling his co-payment for the appointment. He smiled when he saw her. "Perfect timing," he said. "Dr. Matthews says everything looks good. My blood pressure's down since they adjusted my medication." "That's wonderful news," Evie replied, genuinely relieved. "Are you ready for our little adventure?" Soon they were in Walter's sedan, following the GPS directions toward Howard's Haven for Hope. The landscape gradually changed from suburban neighborhoods to increasingly rural farmland as they drove. "Any response to your email?" Walter asked, eyes on the road ahead. "No, nothing," Evie replied. She pulled the flyer from her purse. "But look at this. I got it at the bus stop. There's a big agricultural event happening this week. Today, there's an auction not far from Howard's farm." Walter glanced briefly at the flyer as she held it up. "I wonder if Howard will be at that event." "It's possible," Evie agreed, studying the map on the flyer. "The auction site is in the same general area as his farm, just a different address." "Let's visit his farm first as planned," Walter suggested. "We can always check out the auction afterward." After driving for more than an hour through increasingly remote countryside, they turned onto a long gravel road marked by a simple wooden sign, "Howard's Haven for Hope." The driveway led to a cluster of buildings, a large farmhouse, several barns, and what appeared to be dormitories. The place seemed quiet, with few people visible. As they parked and got out of the car, they noticed a young man emerging from one of the barns. "Hello there," Walter called out, waving. The young man, Hispanic, probably in his early 20s, approached them with a friendly smile. "Hello? Can I help you?" "We're looking for Howard Fielding," Evie said. "Is this his farm?" "Yes, this is Mr. Fielding's place," the young man confirmed. "Do you have an appointment with him?" Walter shook his head. "No, not exactly. We're old friends from back when Howard was a teacher. We sent an email to the address on the website." The young man's expression cleared. "Oh, that's the old email address. We've been switching to a new one this past month, but the website hasn't been updated yet." He looked apologetic. "Mr. Fielding isn't here right now. He and most of our staff and children went to the county agricultural event. There's an auction today, and we're also running a stall to promote our charity program." "Yes, we just heard about the event," Evie said, trying to hide her disappointment. She turned toward the car, ready to leave. "Wait," Walter said, placing a hand on her arm. He turned to the young man. "Since we're already here, would it be possible to look around the farm a bit? We'd love to see what Howard has built here." The young man hesitated. "Let me check with the supervisor on duty. One moment, please." He walked away, pulling out a phone, and had a brief conversation. When he returned, he was smiling. "That's fine. I'd be happy to show you around." For the next 30 minutes, they followed him through the property. He showed them the barns where they kept livestock, the stables for the horses, and the fields where they grew various crops. Throughout the tour, he explained their charity program, how they helped immigrant children learn about agriculture and farming while providing them with education and support. "This is one of our special barns," the young man said, as they approached a colorful structure with children's paintings decorating the exterior. It's designed specifically for the younger children to play, get messy, and explore. Mr. Fielding created this program to introduce farming life to kids in a fun way. Inside the barn, they found a man arranging materials on several low tables. He appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s, with thick black curly hair and fair skin. When he smiled at their entrance, Evie noticed his unusually wide, bright smile. "Ferdinand, these are friends of Mr. Fielding," their young guide explained. They stopped by, hoping to see him. The man wiped his hands on a towel and approached them, extending his hand. "I'm Ferdinand, the activities coordinator. Nice to meet you." "Walter and Evie Marlowe," Walter said as they shook hands. Ferdinand gestured to the materials he'd been arranging. "I'm preparing some demonstration activities for potential investors and clients who will be visiting during the event this week. We want to show them exactly how we work with the children here." He moved around the tables with practiced ease, explaining each station. "I've been here a very long time, since I was 6 years old, actually. Mr. Howard rescued me and took me in when I had nowhere else to go." "Howard was a school teacher before this," Evie said, watching Ferdinand's movements carefully. "Our sons were his students. He always had a way with children." "He's a man with a noble heart," Ferdinand agreed. They looked around the barn, taking in the children's artwork that covered one entire wall. There were colorful drawings done with crayons, alongside more textured creations where leaves, oats, and eggshells had been pasted to create unique effects. Evie's gaze landed on a drawing of a red Cadillac, meticulously decorated with colorful grains of rice glued to the paper. The detail was impressive. "That Cadillac," she said, pointing to the drawing. "I remember that car was Mr. Howard's treasure." Ferdinand nodded. "Yes, he still has it here. In fact, he took it out this morning." He looked at the drawing with pride. "Actually, that one is mine. I made it as an example to show the children. That's why it's neater than their creations." He chuckled, gesturing to the more chaotic artworks surrounding it. Evie felt a strange chill run through her body, like a gust of cold wind across her skin. She stared at Ferdinand more intently, his black curly hair, his wide smile, and felt an unsettling sense of familiarity. Something about his mannerisms, the way he used his hands when he spoke. Ferdinand noticed her staring and shifted uncomfortably. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" Walter placed a subtle hand on Evie's back, a gentle warning. Yes, yes, Evie said quickly. I'm sorry, it's just all these children's crafts. They reminded me of my boys when they were young. She hesitated, then asked, Do you have any siblings, Ferdinand? Evie, Walter said in a low, cautioning voice. Ferdinand chuckled awkwardly. Yes, I do, actually. My brother's at the event today with Mr. Howard. He checked his watch. You should check it out if you have the time. There's going to be a children's performance and an auction. They thanked Ferdinand for his time, and their young guide led them back toward the entrance of the property. As they walked, Evie looked back once again. Her mind raced with possibilities and questions she couldn't yet articulate. When they reached their car, they thanked the young staff member for the tour. Evie's hands trembled slightly as she fastened her seatbelt, her thoughts consumed by the man with the curly black hair and wide smile who had been rescued by Howard Fielding at the age of 6. Inside the car, Walter started the engine and checked the GPS on his phone. The auction site is only 20 minutes from here, he said. Should we go? Absolutely, Evie replied, her voice tense with excitement. I need to speak with Mr. Howard. As they drove down the dusty country road, Walter glanced at his wife. Evie, why did you ask Ferdinand such personal questions about whether he had siblings? Evie stared out the window, watching the farmland roll by. I just had this strange feeling when I saw that Cadillac drawing he made, and then his hair and his smile. She turned to face Walter. They looked like Lucas? Walter shook his head. Evie, you can't possibly think that. They look very different. Just because of the hair color and curls and the smile doesn't mean— I know, Evie interrupted. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be inappropriate. It's just— Something about him felt familiar. Walter patted her hand reassuringly, but said nothing more. The rest of the short drive passed in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. They arrived at the county fairgrounds where the agricultural event was being held. Colorful tents and booths lined the perimeter of a large field, with farm equipment displays in the center. The place was crowded with farmers, ranchers, and families enjoying the festivities. No auction happening right now, Walter observed, checking the schedule posted near the entrance. Looks like it had passed. They walked through the fairgrounds, stopping occasionally to look at displays of prized livestock and agricultural innovations. After about 10 minutes, they spotted a white tent with a blue banner reading, Howard's Haven for Hope, stretched across the top. As they approached, Evie's breath caught in her throat. There, speaking with a couple who appeared to be potential donors, was Howard Fielding. Though 3 decades had passed, she recognized him immediately. His hair had gone completely white, and deep lines etched his face, but he still had the same enthusiastic gesturing as he spoke. They waited until the couple moved on, then stepped forward. "Mr. Fielding?" Walter said. "Howard Fielding?" The older man turned, his expression polite but blank. "Yes? Can I help you?" "You probably don't remember us," Evie said. "I'm Evie Marlowe, and this is my husband Walter. Our sons, Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel. Were your students at Oak Ridge Elementary?" Howard's brow furrowed as he studied their faces. "I'm terribly sorry. It's been a long time, and I'm an old man now, almost 70. He tapped his temple. "The memory fails a bit more each year. Can you believe that?" Evie stepped closer. "I organized your farewell party with the other mothers before you left the school. If there was ever a woman with 3 identical little boys following behind her like ducklings, it was me, Evelyn Marlowe." Recognition slowly dawned in Howard's eyes, and his face broke into a smile. Of course, the Marlowe family. Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel. Bright boys, all 3 of them. His smile faltered slightly. "I'm very glad to see you both after all these years." "We were surprised to learn about your farm," Walter said. "It's quite an impressive operation you've built." "Thank you," Howard replied. "It's been my life's work these past decades. The conversation inevitably shifted to the triplets. Howard's expression grew somber. "I heard about the boys going missing, a terrible tragedy. I was deeply saddened when I learned of it." "I always thought you'd move to another town in a different state to teach," Evie said, watching his reaction carefully. Howard shook his head. "No, I stayed in Texas. I went to a different town to get a certification and prepare for this venture." He gestured around. "Starting this farm was always my dream." Evie leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Howard, do you remember what date you left town? Was it before or after my boys disappeared?" "Before," Howard said promptly. "It must have been before, because otherwise the police would have questioned me." He tilted his head. "Why do you ask?" Without answering, Evie reached into her purse and produced the photograph she had taken from the album. She held it out to Howard. "I was looking at this photo just this morning. It was taken the day the boys disappeared, just an hour before, actually." She pointed to the edge of the frame. "I noticed the Cadillac in the background." Walter stepped closer. "Was that your Cadillac, Mr. Fielding? Do you remember driving in our neighborhood or parking near our home that day?" Howard's expression changed subtly. The affable smile disappeared, replaced by a tight-lipped seriousness. He stared at the photo for a long moment, silent. "I can't remember exactly the date when I left town," he finally said, his voice lower than before. "And I certainly don't recall driving near your home or seeing the boys that day." He handed the photo back to Evie. "It must belong to someone else." Walter nodded, placing a hand on Evie's shoulder. "Well, at least now we have our answer." Evie nodded too, but she noticed Walter's behavior had changed. He seemed suddenly tense, clearing his throat and shifting his weight from foot to foot. Howard looked at them with an unreadable expression. "Do you think the Cadillac is connected to your boy's disappearance?" "We're not sure," Walter replied. "The police never mentioned it back in 1981. We just noticed it in the photo this morning." Howard checked his watch. "It's nearly 3:30. We need to start wrapping up." He turned to two men standing behind the table. "The event is ending at 4 p.m. Let's get everything packed up." He turned back to Evie and Walter. "You should take the opportunity to look around while you can. In about 5 minutes, there will be a closing performance by the children from our farm." He pointed toward a small outdoor stage at the far end of the fairgrounds. "It's quite charming. You might enjoy it." "Thank you," Walter said. "It was good to see you again, Howard." As they walked away from the tent, Evie lagged slightly behind. She heard Howard's voice, low and urgent, speaking into his phone. "Leave immediately after the performance. Get Diego here." "Yes, now." Evie froze, then slowly turned back. Howard was busy directing his staff, paying no attention to them. She hurried to catch up with Walter, her mind racing with questions and a growing sense of dread. They made their way to the small outdoor stage where a group of children was assembling for the closing performance. Most appeared to be Mexican, ranging from about 6 to 9 years old, with a few kindergarten-age children mixed in. The children lined up on the simple wooden platform and began singing a cheerful folk song in Spanish. Evie watched the performance, but her mind was elsewhere. She scanned the crowd, the staff members, looking for anything unusual. After a few minutes, movement at the edge of the stage caught her eye. A man emerged from behind the stage, walking with purpose toward the vendor area. His pace was quick, almost hurried. Even from a distance, Evie could see his thick, curly black hair. "Walter," she whispered urgently, tugging at his sleeve. "Look at that man." She pointed discreetly. "The one walking so fast. See his hair? Doesn't he look like Ferdinand?" Walter followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the retreating figure. "Yes," he said slowly. "The resemblance is striking." "Do you think they're twins?" Evie asked, her voice tight with barely controlled excitement. Before Walter could answer, Evie was already moving away from the crowd, weaving between spectators to get a better look at the man's face. Walter hurried after her, keeping close. They circled around a cotton candy vendor, positioning themselves where they could observe without being obvious. The man had reached Howard's tent and was engaged in an intense conversation with Howard Fielding. As they watched, the man turned slightly, giving them a clear view of his profile. Evie gasped softly. The resemblance to Ferdinand was undeniable. They could have been identical. The same wide smile, the same thick eyebrows, the same animated way of gesturing while speaking. "This must be the brother Ferdinand mentioned," Evie whispered. "Diego, I think, the one Howard was calling for." Walter's face had gone pale. The similar smile. Same curly black hair? Could they be? "Lucas and Noah," Evie finished, her voice barely audible. She gripped Walter's arm tightly. "Remember how Gabriel used to have a slightly smaller body and smaller eyes? He was always the easiest to identify because of his eyes. And Noah had that slightly thicker brow and was always so agile and fast, even though he was calmer than Gabriel and Lucas." They watched as Howard and Diego suddenly broke off their conversation. Howard gestured sharply, and both men began walking rapidly toward the parking area, leaving the other staff members at the tent looking confused. "Why are they in such a rush?" Evie's voice rose with alarm. "We should follow them. I need to talk to that man." She started forward, but Walter caught her arm. "Evie, wait. We could be mistaken. If they really are our boys, Gabriel should be here too. Let's check the area first. If Gabriel is here somewhere, then we can call the police to investigate Howard." Evie hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "You're right. Besides, we know where the farm is if we need to go back." They moved quickly through the fairgrounds, scanning faces in the crowd, looking behind booths and tents, but found no third man resembling Ferdinand and Diego. "Maybe we're wrong," Walter said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe it's just a coincidence." But Evie was already heading back toward Howard's tent, where a single staff member was packing up the last of their materials. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, with weathered hands that spoke of decades of farm work. "Excuse me," Evie said, trying to keep her voice casual. "We were just at the farm earlier today and met Ferdinand. Then we saw another man who looks just like him. Diego, is it? Are they brothers?" The man looked up, nodding. "Yes, they're twins." "Twins?" Evie repeated, exchanging a glance with Walter. The man chuckled. "Well, actually, here's a fun fact. They're triplets. The third one isn't here today, though. He works at Mr. Howard's private estate, not far from the farm." Evie and Walter stared at each other, identical expressions of dread and hope mingling on their faces. "Where is this private estate?" they asked in unison. The man gave them an odd look, clearly taken aback by their synchronized question and sudden intensity. "I'm sorry, but I can't disclose the owner's private information." He handed them a brochure. "Here's the farm address if you want to know more about our programs and what we're doing." "Yes, thank you," Walter said, taking the brochure even though they already had the information. "We appreciate your time." They stepped away from the tent, moving to a quiet corner where they wouldn't be overheard. "Walter," Evie whispered, her voice shaking. "Triplets. They're triplets, and they're the right age. Ferdinand said he's been with Howard since he was 6. Walter ran a hand through his hair, his expression stricken. It can't be a coincidence. The Cadillac in the photo, Howard's strange reaction, and now these 3 men who look so much alike. "Our boys," Evie said, tears filling her eyes. After all these years, could we have finally found our boys? They rushed to the parking lot, scanning the area for Howard or Diego, but saw no sign of either man. Getting into their car, Walter started the engine. "We're going back to the farm," he said firmly, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "That's where they're most likely to go." As they pulled onto the road, Evie pulled out her phone and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, she asked to speak to a detective, explaining it was regarding their cold case of missing children from 1981. Within moments, she was connected to Detective Martinez from the Missing Persons Unit. "This is going to sound incredible," Evie began, her voice trembling slightly. "But my husband and I believe we found our sons who disappeared 30 years ago." She quickly explained everything: the photograph with the Cadillac, finding Howard Fielding at his charity farm, and discovering two men who appeared to be identical to each other, with a third brother not present. "They looked like at the right age, should be 36 now, and they have the same features as our boys," she concluded. The man who took them, Howard Fielding, was their elementary school teacher. He left the event in a hurry when we showed him the photograph. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Marlowe," Detective Martinez replied, his tone calm but firm. "But I need you to promise not to confront Mr. Fielding on your own once you reach the farm. He was a respected figure in the community, and we'd like to question him first. We're also working on gathering more information and locating his private residence. My team and I are heading to the farm now, and I've already contacted the local sheriff's department. They should be there within 10 minutes. "We're almost there," Walters said, turning onto the gravel road leading to Howard's Haven for Hope. "If you see Howard, maintain a safe distance," the detective warned. "The fact that he left early from the event with one of these men is concerning, but we have to be careful." "We will," Evie promised, keeping the line open. They reached the farm, but parked well away from the main buildings, positioning their car behind a stand of trees where they could observe without being seen. Minutes ticked by with no sign of movement, though a car remained parked in the farm's lot. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, 3 figures emerged from the main house: Howard, Diego, and Ferdinand. They moved quickly, throwing bags into the trunk of Howard's car. "They're leaving," Evie whispered into the phone. "Howard, Ferdinand, and Diego. They're all getting into a car." "Stay where you are," Detective Martinez instructed. "We've found the farm's property records. It's registered under a different name than Howard Fielding. We're issuing warrants now to search both the farm and the private residence we've located." As Howard's car began to pull away from the house, 2 sheriff's vehicles appeared on the gravel drive, lights flashing. They quickly positioned themselves to block the exit. "The sheriff's deputies are here," Evie reported, her heart racing. "Good. Stay in your car until I tell you otherwise," the detective replied. Through the windshield, they watched as 4 deputies approached Howard's vehicle, hands hovering near their holsters. Howard stepped out, his hands in the air, but his face a mask of confusion and anger. Ferdinand and Diego exited more slowly, looking bewildered. One of the deputies spoke at length with Howard, who gestured emphatically, pointing toward the house and shaking his head. The deputy seemed uncertain, glancing at his colleagues. "I think the sheriff is hesitant," Walter murmured. "Howard must have a good reputation around here." Indeed, they could hear fragments of conversation carried on the breeze. Respected figure in the county? Charity work? Must be a misunderstanding. "I can't wait any longer," Evie said suddenly, dropping the phone into her purse but leaving the line open. "They're going to let him go." Before Walter could stop her, she was out of the car and striding toward the group. Walter hurried after her. "Howard Fielding!" Evie called out, her voice stronger than she felt. Everyone turned to look at them. Howard's expression darkened when he recognized them. "Mrs. Marlowe," one of the deputies said, stepping forward, "please return to your vehicle. We're handling this situation." Instead, Evie reached into her purse and pulled out the photograph from 1981. She held it up for everyone to see. "If you're even considering letting this man go, then let me show you something," she said, pulling out the photo. "These are my sons, Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel Marlowe. They vanished 30 years ago, on June 12, 1981. She turned and pointed to Ferdinand and Diego. "And here are 2 of them standing right in front of you. Ferdinand and Diego stared at the photograph, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock. They moved closer, examining the image of three identical boys in green checkered overalls. "That's us," Ferdinand said softly. "With Marco." "Is there a third brother?" one of the deputies asked sharply. Both men nodded, still staring at the photograph. "I did nothing wrong," Howard insisted, his voice rising. "I saved these boys. They were abandoned." "These were my children. They were not abandoned," Evie said, her voice breaking. "They disappeared while playing outside our house one afternoon." She pointed to the edge of the photograph. "That's your Cadillac in the background, isn't it, Howard?" "The same one you still have." Howard remained silent, his jaw working. "The Cadillac is in the garage near the farmhouse," Diego said quietly. "He still has it." Ferdinand looked at Evie, then at Walter. "Are you really our parents? Howard told us you were in prison?" "Yes," they said in unison, tears streaming down Evie's face. "But we were never in prison. That man has been lying to you all this time. You've all grown so much, just like Walter and I always believed you would." "We're 36 years old now," Diego said, as if trying to make sense of it all. "That's right," Evie confirmed. "You were born on February 15th, 1975. The deputies exchanged glances, then the senior officer stepped forward. "Mr. Fielding, please turn around and place your hands behind your back. You are now our primary suspect in the kidnapping case." As one deputy handcuffed Howard, another spoke into his radio, confirming the warrant execution at the private residence. The peaceful farm transformed into a hive of activity as more law enforcement vehicles arrived. Forensic technicians searched the buildings while detectives interviewed Ferdinand and Diego separately. In the garage, they found the Cadillac, its cherry red paint dulled with age, but unmistakably the same vehicle from the photograph. In Howard's office, they discovered the original license plate hidden in a locked drawer, along with documents bearing the false names of Ferdinand, Diego, and Marco. "They should be Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel," Evie told the detective, watching as evidence was bagged and tagged. "I know Ferdinand is Lucas because of his wide smile. Diego is Noah. He always had that agility and slimmer build. So Marco must be Gabriel." "They're not even Mexican," Walter added, "though our ancestry does include some mixed heritage, which is why they could pass for Hispanic." When questioned about their third brother, Ferdinand explained, "Howard always kept Marco at the house, never at the farm. He takes care of the younger children there, mostly orphaned immigrant kids." "He told us we were rescued," Diego added. "Said our parents were immigrants who did something bad and went to prison for life. We believed him because we were so young when it happened." "What did he do to you?" a detective asked gently. Both men looked uncomfortable. "Nothing bad in the last 20 years, Ferdinand finally said. "He just expected absolute obedience, to do things exactly as he said." "But our childhood was harsh," Diego added quietly. "He would discipline us often, make us strip, touch us in ways that felt strange, then hit us with a rattan stick. He said it was the consequence for not listening or being naughty. Now we understand what he really did. But even all these times, we genuinely believed we were so bad that he had to treat us that way for our own good. That's what he made us believe, especially Diego." Later that evening, as twilight settled over the farm, a call came through from the team at Howard's private residence. "We found Marco," the officer reported, "along with 8 children ranging from 4 to 10 years old. We're moving them all to the hospital for evaluation. Many appear frightened and traumatized." "And Marco?" Evie asked anxiously. "How is he?" "Confused, but physically well. We've explained the situation briefly. He, Ferdinand, and Diego will be reunited at the police station, along with you and your husband." As darkness fell, Evie and Walter were escorted to a police car for the drive to the station. Ferdinand and Diego followed in separate vehicles, each accompanied by a detective. Evie reached for Walter's hand as they drove away from the farm, leaving behind the place that had been both a prison and a home to their sons for 3 decades. "Our boys," she whispered. "We found our boys." The fluorescent lights of the police station cast harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Evie sat in a small interview room, a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee untouched before her. Detective Martinez sat across the table, recording device between them, as she recounted the day her world had shattered 30 years ago. "Our community was very close back then," she explained, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Everyone knew everyone. Mr. Howard was highly respected. He was the boys' favorite teacher. Sometimes he'd drive children home with parent consent, of course." She described that fateful day, her voice steady despite the pain that still lingered in her eyes. "Walter and I were both home, but we often let the children play outside by themselves for a few hours. It was a different time back then, in 1981. The neighbors all knew the boys, so we felt safe letting them play unsupervised." "You didn't see them being taken?" Detective Martinez asked gently. Evie shook her head. "I was doing house chores in the back room. Walter was fixing something in the backyard. Neither of us was watching the window." Her voice caught. "One minute they were there, playing in the front yard, and the next they were just gone." The detective nodded sympathetically, making notes. "Mrs. Marlowe, we've interviewed Mr. Fielding and questioned the staff from the farm. Given his age and health, Mr. Fielding seems to have decided to confess rather than fight the charges." Evie straightened, her attention sharpening. "What did he say?" "He said he always felt connected to the Triplets. That's how he phrased it. That afternoon, before he supposedly left town, he decided he wanted to take them with him." The detective flipped through his notes. "He lured them by offering ice cream and a short drive in his Cadillac. The boys were apparently fascinated with that car." "Lucas especially," Evie whispered. Fielding had planned the kidnapping in advance. He had already packed essentials and had forged paperwork for crossing county lines. Later, he returned to this county and established the farm using a forged identity. He purchased the isolated property with cash under a false LLC and claimed to be running a nonprofit for migrant children. "But how could there be no witnesses?" Walter asked, having been brought into the room to hear the findings. "And how did the police never find him?" "There were no screams or struggles that would have alerted anyone," the detective explained. To the boys, Mr. Howard was a trusted figure, offering them ice cream and a ride in his fancy car. "The Triplets were known to wander within the block," Evie added, "so maybe no one thought anything of seeing them with him?" "Exactly," Detective Martinez confirmed. After the ice cream trip, Fielding convinced them not to go home yet. He told them their house was in danger and that their parents were involved in something bad. Over time, he brainwashed the boys. They had trusted him so completely that it was relatively easy to manipulate them. They were only 6 years old. Walter took Evie's hand, his face grim. "He told the Triplets they were orphaned immigrant children," the detective continued, "that their parents had hidden their true origins from them, that they had been living illegally in America, and that you both had been sent to prison. He gradually indoctrinated them with these stories, even creating fabricated photo albums to support his lies." "So the motive for kidnapping our boys was just fascination?" Evie asked incredulously. The detective's expression grew somber. "We've investigated Fielding's background. He lost his entire family, wife and twin sons, in a house fire in the early 70s. It appears he suffered a psychological break, though he managed to function outwardly in society. Based on his statements and psychological evaluation, he came to believe certain children were meant to be his, especially those with strong emotional bonds, like triplets." Evie closed her eyes, trying to process the twisted logic that had stolen 3 decades from her family. "What happens now?" Walter asked. "Fielding will face multiple charges: kidnapping, child abuse, false imprisonment, identity fraud, and more. The younger children found at his private residence are being evaluated. and we're working to identify them and locate their families." The detective stood. "But I think there are 3 people who have waited long enough to see you." He opened the door and spoke quietly to an officer in the hallway. Moments later, the door reopened. Ferdinand, Diego, and Marco, Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel stood hesitantly in the doorway. Though they were grown men now, Evie could still see her little boys in their features. Lucas's wide smile, Noah's thoughtful eyes, Gabriel's smaller frame. For a long moment, no one moved. 30 years of separation hung between them like an invisible wall. A lifetime of missed birthdays, graduations, heartaches, and triumphs. Then Evie rose from her chair, a strangled sob escaping her throat. She took one uncertain step forward, then another. Walter stood beside her, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. "My boys," Evie whispered. "My beautiful boys." Something in her voice seemed to break through. Lucas was the first to move, crossing the room in 3 long strides to enfold his mother in his arms. Noah and Gabriel followed immediately, and Walter stepped forward to complete the circle. They stood there, 5 people holding onto each other as if afraid they might disappear again, tears mingling as 3 decades of grief and loss poured out in a flood of emotion. "I never stopped looking for you," Evie said through her tears, touching each of their faces in turn, relearning the contours that had changed from boy to man. "Not for one single day." "We didn't know," Gabriel said softly. "We thought you were gone." "But we're here now," Walter said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're all here now." Outside the interview room window, the night had deepened, stars appearing in the vast Texas sky. Inside, a family torn apart by one man's twisted obsession began the first tentative moments of healing, holding on to each other in the harsh fluorescent light of a small-town police station. Finally, miraculously, complete once more.